Detective recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain an action thriller film called Revenge. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. A married man named Richard flies his socialite girlfriend, Jen, to his secluded rest house in the middle of the desert for the weekend. He wants to spend some alone time with her before his annual hunting trip with his friends. As he's about to go inside his house, his pilot gives him some peyote, a small, spineless cactus, for a welcoming gift. Inside, Richard finds Jen standing on the bed, moving gracefully and enticing him. Without wasting any time, Richard grabs Jen and expresses his desire for her. In return, Jen undresses Richard and goes down on him. Once they're done, Richard receives a call from his wife, telling him how busy she is at home. When Richard goes back to bed, Jen won't even look at him. Richard tries to sweet-talk her, which doesn't take long to work. The following day, Richard's friends, Stan and Dimitri, arrive unannounced. Richard is pissed at having his quality time with Jen ruined, but the two men say they worked hard to make sure they arrive there early. Richard then introduces Jen to his friends, who are shocked but happy at the same time. When Jen excuses herself, Stan and Dimitri can't help but stare at her as if they've never seen a woman before. Sarcastically, Stan asks Richard if his wife and their kids are okay, but Richard doesn't answer his question and instead informs him that Jen is leaving the following day and that they aren't supposed to meet. That night, the four of them decide to have some fun and drink. As Richard brings out more alcohol, Stan and Dimitri are unable to resist Jen's beauty, and they're talking to and staring at her the whole time. When Richard sits with them, Dimitri notices his peyote. Richard tells them that it's a local and highly powerful hallucinogenic, and an excited Dimitri suddenly grabs the peyote from Richard. He then tosses it to Stan, and Stan tosses it back to him, but Richard immediately catches it and warns them that using peyote while carrying weapons can lead to accidents. Embarrassed, Stan and Dimitri take their seats while Richard asks Jen to hide his peyote for him. Happy to oblige, Jen goes back inside the house, where she hides the peyote inside her necklace. Before going back outside, Jen plays some music for the men before dancing for them. When Jen tries to get Richard to dance with her, her boyfriend declines, so he asks Stan instead. Jen seductively dances with Stan, who is clearly having the time of his life. As Stan continues to dance with her, Richard decides that his friend has already had enough and puts Jen over his shoulder before turning in for the night. Jen wakes up alone in the morning, and when she goes out to look for Richard, Stan greets her with too much enthusiasm. She then joins him for breakfast, and Stan informs her that Richard went out to give their passports to the gamekeeper, which will take a while. He also adds that Dimitri is nursing a hangover, making Jen laugh. Stan then remarks that it's just the two of them, but Jen pays him no mind and uses her phone instead. When she notices that Stan is staring at her, Jen excuses herself from the table and says she'll start packing her stuff, leaving Stan disappointed. As Jen gets dressed after taking a shower, she is startled to see that Stan is standing by the doorway. Stan apologizes for scaring her, but Jen doesn't seem to mind. Stan then enters Jen's room without invitation and sits beside her before telling her that it's a shame they don't have enough time to get to know each other better. When he gives Jen his calling card and asks her to call him sometime, Jen reluctantly tells him that she's not sure if she'll be able to. Pissed, Stan asks Jen what she doesn't like about him. Jen then gets uncomfortable and finds it hard to answer his question, but when she finally does, she tells Stan that he isn't her type at all. Stan wants to know why Jen feels that way, so Jen simply says Stan is short and she likes tall guys. Stan sarcastically laughs and asks Jen if his height changed overnight, and when Jen says no, he implies that she was coming on to him the previous day. Feeling nervous now, Jen tries to get away from him, but he won't stop harassing her. Without warning, Stan pushes her against the glass and removes her underwear, and as he is about to take her from behind, Dimitri opens the door and sees them. Stan then asks him if he wants to have his turn on Jen, too, but Dimitri just keeps on eating his snack before turning to leave. Without anyone to disturb them anymore, Stan forces himself on Jen, making her cry in pain. As Dimitri walks away and hears Jen's sobs, he turns up the television volume before going out for a swim. When Richard returns and notices that his two friends are being too quiet, Stan explains that there's been a problem with Jen. Richard then tries to talk to his girlfriend, but Jen won't talk much and only insists on Richard calling the helicopter, saying she wants to go home. As Jen cries quietly, Richard goes back outside to confront Stan about what he did. When Jen wakes up a few hours later, Richard informs her that he's arranged a job for her in Canada, assuring her that everything's okay. He also adds that he's transferred some money to her account, which she can use as she pleases. Instead of accepting Richard's bribe, Jen demands he call the helicopter before she starts packing her stuff, but Richard tells her that's not possible. He then blames Jen for being too beautiful, claiming she's hard to resist. Hurt and angry, Jen once again demands Richard call the helicopter, threatening to call his wife and tell her everything about them if he doesn't. Without warning, Richard slaps Jen so hard that she falls to the floor. As he stands over her, Richard starts calling her names, demanding her not to talk about his wife again. Jen then runs outside while Richard gives chase, and as soon as Stan and Dimitri see them, they quickly follow. The three men chase Jen to a cliff, and when Richard sees that she's thinking about jumping over, he stops her and apologizes for slapping her. Richard tries to justify what he did by saying he was just stressed out, and when Jen doesn't say anything, he asks for Stan's phone, promising that he'll call the helicopter. After talking to Roberto, the pilot, Richard informs her that the pilot will arrive in 30 minutes. Relieved, she lets down her guard, only for Richard to suddenly push her off the cliff. Jen is impaled on a tree, and as the men look at her body, Stan asks his friend why he did such a thing. Like a cold-blooded killer, Richard tells them that Jen could put them in jail for 15 years. He then orders Stan and Dimitri to do everything he says, saying they'll go hunting as planned and clean up the mess on the way. Then, they'll go home with their trophies just like every year, but they have to make sure not to arouse suspicion. Once Stan and Dimitri agree with Richard's plan, the three of them leave. Back at the rest house, Richard burns Jen's stuff as he and his friends prepare their gears and weapons for their hunting trip. Richard then calls his wife as if nothing happened, and when Stan apologizes to him for what happened to Jen, Richard quips that he's never heard of her. Meanwhile, Jen miraculously regains consciousness while still being impaled on a tree branch. With every ounce of strength left in her body, she reaches her lighter and sets the tree on fire, causing it to break and her to hit the ground. After a while, Jen suddenly hears the sound of moving vehicles, signaling Richard and his friend's arrival. With the branch still sticking out of her body, Jen forces herself to crawl away from where she landed and hides. On the other hand, Richard and his friends are horrified when they find no sign of Jen's body. Completely panicking, Stan suggests they find Jen and bring her to the hospital. He says with the help of their lawyers, they can make what happened to Jen look like an accident. Annoyed at his friend's cowardice, Richard is adamant about not calling anyone, reminding Stan that Jen is alone and hurt and won't stand a chance against three armed men. They then set out to find Jen, and once Jen hears they're gone, she starts moving, too. It's already dark when the men reach the tree where Jen landed. When they see Jen's iPod and traces of her blood around the vicinity, they feel confident that it won't take them long to find her. They then follow Jen's blood trail, and once it stops by the river, they agree to split up to find her faster. Stan decides to stay behind, in case Jen returns there, while Richard and Dimitri go in opposite directions. Meanwhile, Jen continues wandering around, going under the water when she hears someone coming. As if by luck, Jen finds Dimitri urinating by the river with his rifle resting against a rock. Jen creeps up behind him and takes his weapon, and when Dimitri turns to face her, Jen pulls the trigger. Unfortunately, the gun isn't loaded, so Dimitri just easily grabs the gun and pushes her back. While on the ground, Dimitri hits Jen and mocks her for thinking he would leave his gun lying around for anyone to touch. He then informs his friends that he's got Jen, telling them he'll meet them at the Jeep once he takes care of her. Stan breathes a sigh of relief upon hearing the news, then casually plays some music using Jen's iPod. As Dimitri attempts to drown Jen, he tells her that he likes letting his prey come to him and make it think it's attacking him, when in fact, he's the one waiting for it. Jen tries to fight back, but Dimitri is too big and strong for her. When she manages to grab Dimitri's knife, she quickly stabs him in the eyes as soon as her head is out of the water. With the knife still stuck to his eyes, Dimitri stumbles around, still trying to come at Jen. But eventually, he collapses and dies while Jen bravely pulls out the knife from his eyes, then watches him as he sinks into the river. After taking Dimitri's supplies, Jen travels through the desert using his ATV but is forced to walk when it suddenly stops working. She then goes into a cave and builds a fire before drinking some beer. She tries to remove the branch sticking out of her body but stops once it gets too painful. While lying down, Jen suddenly remembers the peyote she hid in her necklace and eats it. She then starts loading Dimitri's rifle, and as she stares into the fire, Jen suddenly feels weird while starting to hear loud music. Numb and hallucinating, Jen opens the beer can using the knife before making several incisions around her wound to easily remove the branch sticking out of her abdomen. Upon removing the branch, Jen watches her blood gush out of her body. She then gets the aluminum beer can to put it over the fire, and once it's hot enough, she uses it to cauterize her wound. The next day, Stan is startled when Richard throws a dead animal on his windshield. Realizing that Dimitri isn't back yet, Richard tries to radio him, but there's no answer. As Stan pees and washes up by the river, Dimitri's decomposing body suddenly floats, scaring the daylights out of him. Richard then checks to see what the commotion is about, while Stan throws up and gets in his car, where he throws a fit. As Richard stares at his dead friend's body, he realizes that Dmitri has been stabbed in the eyes. He then drags him out of the water while Stan grudgingly watches from his car. After Richard asks for Stan's help to get rid of Dmitri's body, Stan expresses bitterness about what happened. He believes that Dmitri would still be alive if Richard hadn't pushed Jen off the cliff. Once they toss Dmitri to the deeper part of the river, Richard suddenly punches Stan in the face, breaking his nose. The two then continue their search for Jen, who is still sleeping in a cave. When Jen wakes up, she realizes that the Phoenix logo from the beer can has been transferred to her body, finding it quite symbolic since she's just escaped death. When she gets up to leave the cave, Richard suddenly shows up and blows her head off. Jen then wakes up, screaming, and realizes it was just a dream. She continues to have a series of nightmares about the three men terrorizing and hunting her, and when she finally wakes up, she takes Dmitri's weapons and sets out to find her attackers. Meanwhile, Richard and Stan are determined to find her first. Using their map, Richard and Stan decide to split up again. With her binoculars, Jen manages to find where Stan is, and when he starts driving, she prepares to make her move. Stan's vehicle suddenly runs out of gas while Jen is on his tail, and as he refills his tank, Jen tries aiming at him from afar. However, the peyote's effects haven't completely worn off, making Jen occasionally hallucinate. After taking a better aim, Jen shoots and hits Stan in the shoulder while the impact of her rifle knocks her to the ground. Jen quickly gathers herself and looks for Stan to shoot him once more, but the man has left his SUV. As Jen cautiously moves closer to Stan's vehicle, she sees traces of blood on the ground. Stan desperately tries to flee, but Jen is closely following him, ready to shoot at any time. Using his sock to lessen his bleeding, Stan continues to run away from Jen while crying in pain. He then hides from Jen, who is still looking for him, and when she passes by him, Stan shoots her from behind, grazing her ear. Stan has turned the tables on Jen when he starts chasing and shooting her. In an attempt to escape, she breaks her flashlight and leaves broken glass on the ground, which Stan eventually steps on. Jen continues to run away while Stan wails in pain, trying to remove the shard of glass in his foot. Once he manages to take it out, Stan staggers back to his car, bleeding even more as he steps on the pedal. He then tries to run Jen over, but Jen is set on killing him. As Stan approaches, Jen shoots him and misses twice, but her third shot hits Stan in the head, finally killing him. As Richard tries to contact Stan through the radio, Jen takes his vehicle and drives away. With no word from Stan still, Richard decides to go back to the house. At home, Richard calls his pilot to inform him that he'll be coming home earlier than planned. He says something came up at work, and he's already dropped his friends at the airport. When the pilot tells Richard he'll pick him up in 30 minutes, Richard goes to the bathroom to take a quick shower, bringing his gun with him. As he savors the feeling of the water on his skin, Richard hears some noise outside, prompting him to check it out. While still naked, Richard takes his gun and looks for the source of the noise, carefully scanning his surroundings. After scouring the house and finding no sign of Jen, Richard goes back inside and sits on the couch. As he is about to relax, the television suddenly turns on, startling him. He then looks for the remote control to turn it off, and when he turns around, he finds Jen standing outside his house, her rifle pointed at him. As they stare at each other, Richard realizes how much Jen is bleeding. Richard is about to explain himself when Jen shoots him without warning, hitting him just below the ribcage. Although he's heavily injured, Richard tries to shoot back, but Jen won't stop firing at him. Frustrated, Richard crawls inside the house, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Jen then follows him, and when she sees the trail stopping just before the glass door, Jen stops walking, too. Unknown to Jen, Richard is just standing by the wall next to her, ready to blow her head off. When Jen is about to take a step forward, she suddenly notices Richard's blood pooling in front of her. She then quietly moves back and goes to the other side of the house, but when she gets there, Richard is already gone. The two continue to search for each other, and as Richard keeps bleeding profusely, he decides to cover his body with cling wrap to help lessen the bleeding. Jen hears the clatter of the plates that Richard dropped, and when she checks it out and sees Richard, she immediately fires, forcing him to flee. As they continue chasing each other around the house, Jen slips in Richard's blood and drops her gun. She tries to retrieve it, but Richard catches up to her and knocks her unconscious. When Jen stirs, she finds Richard dragging her. He then picks Jen up and pushes her against the wall, choking her and mocking her. With no weapon to defend herself, Jen plunges her hand into Richard's wound, causing him excruciating pain. This forces him to let go of her, and when Jen finally gets the gun, Richard tries to grab it, but she immediately shoots him in the chest, sending him flying across the room. As she gets up, Jen casually steps over Richard's body and goes outside, where she hears the helicopter arriving. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.